Yeah, I might just for Brett and Jeremy's sake, and anyone else who joins, might just introduce myself and the Federation. I'll give it a minute here, but probably going to continue that comment that Jeremy made about data a little bit when we just mentioned a little bit about what the Federation does.
Yeah, sounds great. All right, let's go. Let's do it.
Great, great. We'll let people jump into it here. Well, Brett, good to meet you. Jeremy, good to meet you. And PK, always good to see you. I'm glad we could learn a little bit more about Beer 30 today. And Jeremy, for you guys, I haven't gotten a chance to meet. I'm with the Federation, and we are a group purchasing organization specializing in the craft industry. So relatively new as we head into year two. And our overall structure is we work with more and more predominantly breweries. They make up about 85% of our members. We do have some other craft partners that we are joined, but a lot of what we're trying to do is work with our members on organizing some of their procurement activities. So a lot of different ways you can do that. We're doing more RFPs with them. We're doing combined contracts. We're really working with them on understanding how can you save time and money on what you're trying to purchase to run your organization. And so that's really our focus from a standpoint here. And we got someone we've got someone new added here. But what's great about what we'll be talking about today with PK is a lot of times when I'm starting to talk with breweries, I'm asking on try to understand, what information do they have about some of their cost of goods? Where is some of that written down? Where, what is it that their current costs today? And you don't know where you can go until you kind of have a baseline of where you're at. So that's why, the Beer 30 platform is great. The discussion around it is really helpful. Jeremy, you mentioned data. I'm a big fan of data of who's got it, where is it, and how can you use it. So I've got a whole host of some questions here from some breweries I've been talking to the last couple of weeks who some weren't able to join today, but they're questions I hear as I go out and speak with a lot of different brewery owners about what are they doing, and we'll get into it. I'll kind of save them as we get into the topics as we go. I'm sure that others on the phone will have questions too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate the few minutes you guys give you guys a little bit of overview of what the Federation is, what it is that we do.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone for joining in. So I'm actually going to screen share and we'll get into this. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, we're good. Awesome.
Yep.
All right, cool. So yeah, we're gonna start off with a bit of a presentation about just the importance of brewery software systems. Some of this you may be familiar with, but others may be brand new to you. So this should be really cool to understand. We'll do a light demo of Beer 30. This isn't designed to be the full-fledged demo, but at least give you an understanding as to how the interface works, kind of some of the ways that we differentiate ourselves from the competition. And then, as Dan mentioned, Q&A. Trying to stay on time here. Have about 40 more minutes wrapped up into this 45 minutes, just so we're done by the top of the hour. So with this, the first thing, just quick introduction. My name is Pulkit K. Agrawal, also go by PK. I'm the founder and CEO of The Fifth Ingredient. My background is that I actually studied mechanical engineering at Harvard University and then was recruited to work at Ballast Point Brewing in San Diego as a process engineer. The focus for me was on packaging equipment, so bottling, canning, kegging lines. And I started the fifth ingredient with the idea of consulting for breweries. So Jeremy, kind of down your path of let's look at data for breweries, and the idea being the four ingredients in beer: water, malt, hops, yeast, and the fifth ingredient is data. And then I quickly realized after I started traveling and hitting up some breweries that a lot of them, whether they were on orchestrated beer, ecos, or vicinity at the time, they were still on paper logs, whiteboards, and spreadsheets for the actual brewing process. And so that's really where Beer 30 came about. And at this point, as I'll mention in a bit, but Beer 30, we have over 450 breweries using our system. Smallest one does about 70 barrels. Largest does about 80,000 barrels, and that would be Kona Brewing Hawaii. And we have an assortment of breweries of all sizes in between. And as another note, in December 2023 or December 2022, I was also added to the Forbes 30 under 30 for the food and drink category. So with that, let's actually talk a little bit about why you're all here. And so one of the big things, and Dan was alluding to this earlier, when it comes to the cost of goods side, is beer is not a fixed widget. And we all know what that means is that beer is constantly changing during fermentation. The yield is changing because of yeast health. You can take a base beer and you can split it up into different varieties of flavored beers. And the very interesting thing is that during each of those splits and merges, you really need to start tracking your cost of goods sold or your COGS. And with that, one of the biggest aspects of beer not being a fixed widget is that supply chain changes have a direct impact as to what's happening. And these are all inputs that tie in with raw materials, packaging, supplies. And we know that they aren't at the levels that they were pre-pandemic, but we also know that they're not where they were a year ago, right? And as everybody on this call is CEOs or CFOs or brewery owners, one of the key points I always like talking about, which is why brewery softwares are so important, is knowing that there are levers to pull. And notice that you own the manufacturing process. And so with that, some of the key takeaways are that never assume that brewers are doing the best job that they could. Actually look at the data and see how you can get better yields and more output. And then similarly, never assume that you have the best rates for raw materials and packaging supplies. Look at your finances and investigate better contract renegotiations. Right. And the key here is that always remember that you're investing in efficiency and that software can have a massive yield increase for output. Feel free to stop at any point, by the way, unmute yourself, ask questions. A lot easier than me just talking for a good 40 minutes. So with that, my mentality behind this is that when it comes to a brewery's health, there are three key factors. There's quality, efficiency, and sales. And overall, complacency pretty much kills a brewery at this point. On the quality side, you got to keep your customers happy. If you make crappy product, you're going to lose a customer for life because you're literally just going to go right down the road to a different brewery and have beer there that's better. From an efficiency standpoint, you need more output in the same time. Right? At the end of the day, time is money. And if you're not being efficient with your process, fermentation is taking extra days, it's not going to lead to a very healthy brewery. And then finally, sales. You need to keep growing your profit margins, right? And so at the end of the day, quality, efficiency, sales need to always be aligned in order to make sure that your brewery is healthy and that it's constantly improving. And so with that, when it comes to the importance of brewery software systems, I've outlined 7 steps that tie in with making sure that we all understand what are the main areas and what is it that we're trying to solve. So the first thing is define the problems that you're trying to solve. So with brewery software systems, if people don't have that, usually there's a lot of disjointed information, and you may have multiple data entry based on paper logs, whiteboard spreadsheets. You may have redundant data entry as well. You could be on a different software system and still manually keep track of all the information. And at the end of the day or at the end of the week, people have homework that they have to do to enter into those software systems. There's a lack of a single source of truth, right? Many times it is that when you have these paper logs and spreadsheets, nobody knows what the actual source of truth is, where they can always find the most accurate cost of goods sold or find the most accurate stock on hand. What happens with that problem is that it leads to teams not communicating as well. You have text messages, you have end of shift emails. Sometimes you have responses 2 to 3 days later, right? Imagine putting a truck together and knowing that you have beer going out the door and you're waiting to hear from somebody as to what exactly is the live stock inventory that you have available, right? And it's completely unacceptable to be days and days behind as opposed to having things real time. And with that, needing to understand and have an uninformed business decision process where you're slow to recognize the trends, or maybe you recognize them after it's too late. And with that, probably spending hours tracking down issues from either quality or cost of goods sold. And with that, the importance of it is then also a lack of visibility, where lack of visibility could be in areas such as inventory, brews that are in process, quality control, cost of goods sold, sales, tax compliance. So these are, like, for example, 6 areas that having a brewery software system properly implemented is very critical for. Now, with the implementation of a brewery software system, one of the key things is to define success and make sure that you can measure it. What that looks like is set targets and goals with breakdown of what success is, right? And one of the key points that I always emphasize with this is don't let perfection be the enemy of innovation, right? A lot of times we're like, oh, we want to get this completely perfect before you get it out the door. And you're just going to spend weeks, months trying to get something completely perfect. But instead, set up different checkpoints, right? So what we tell our customers is that with Beer 30, it's pretty much a 3-step implementation process. You pretty much focus in on streamlining the brew sheets, paper logs, whiteboards. That's about getting you 50% there. Then you're making purchase orders, sales orders, you're calculating cost of goods sold, takes you about 80% there. And the final step is accounting integration with QuickBooks Online or Xero, gets you 100% there. And so pretty much it ends up being that each of these checkpoints, 50, 80, 100, are all steps to make sure that we're being properly successful. Any questions so far with this? No? Cool. So from there, we start talking about, well, number 3, understand the solutions in the market and the features required at your brewery. So one of the big things that you'll hear in the software terminology space is point solutions versus full stack solutions. And what that means is that a point solution really focuses in on one key area, while a full stack solution is on the entire process. What that looks like is point solutions could be department specific. So this could be something like using Brew Planner for scheduling, using Beersmith or Brewer's Friend for recipes, Draft Lab for sensory, Barrel IT for barrels, keg tracking via Keg ID, Keg Chart Convoy, having a system designed for just brew process and quality like Beer 30's production modules or Grist, looking at lab tech such as Firmly, purely inventory systems like Deer or Unleashed, accounting with QuickBooks Online, Xero, SAP, NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics, getting into the hardware and automation side with things like precision fermentation, OFS, Firmacraft, Plato, or Rotec, and then getting into your POS systems, point of sales like Arrive, Square, Clover, Toast. So again, these are all very specific in areas that they're focused in on when you break them apart like that. But on the other end, with full stack solutions, you have full brewery areas. And in particular, the 4 areas that these solutions focus in on are purchasing of raw materials and inventory, production management, sales, and accounting integration. And in general, these are some of the logos of softwares that exist in the market today. You have Beer 30 that you can use full stack, Ecos, Encompass or Orchestrated Beer, Crafted ERP, Brew Ninja, Ollie, Vicinity, and I'm sure there's going to be more in the next couple of years as well. But effectively, depending on each of those systems, you're really looking at key areas and the details that tie in behind that. So with that, with a brewery software system, step number 4 is really explore the combination between full stack solutions and point solutions that solve your problem. And the key here is that some of those solutions are going to integrate. There's something called an API, which is an application programming interface. And really, you need to understand what's the value proposition and really if you need the connection. a lot of times one of the blockers that I experience from people is that they're like, oh, Beer 30 doesn't integrate with X or Y. X or Y could be a POS system, for example, in our case. And the realistic thing is that we have a really hard understanding of what's a nice to have versus need to have. And even in those full stack solutions, you can have very primary focuses as well. So, for example, Beer 30 is built with a brewer in mind. My background was an engineer at Ballast Point, and collectively, we have over 140 years of brewing experience in some capacity on staff, right? Whether it's as brewmasters, whether it's head brewers, cellar people, COOs, distribution managers, etc. Well, there's other systems that are really accounting focused, and that could be a really big differentiating factor. And some of them can work in tandem without syncing. So, for example, you could have precision fermentation for hardware, have arrived for your point of sale. You could theoretically have orchestrated beer, crafted and ecos for the accounting side, or Beer 30 for the process and quality side. So, again, just different ways that you can have that ecosystem. And this is something that we actually have where we have some bigger breweries that use orchestrated beer for the accounting side, but then Beer 30 for the entire production side as well. And so it's really cool to see that we've built out Beer 30 in a way that allows you to mix and match based on what your needs are, so that way you're getting the best of all the worlds combined for your brewery. Now, once you've figured out the system that you're going to be using, the next big thing is to really focus in on leadership and team buy-in. What this looks like as step number 5 is make sure that the executive team and heads of each department have signed off on implementation. And if you don't get this, this is where you have an example of a waterfall effect that's very negative, actually, where, for example, this is one of the areas where implementation would fail with something like Beer 30, where let's say that the packaging manager is not bought in. Well, if he or she is not taking the tanks and packaging them out in real time, well, then the filter team can't do their job of emptying out FVs into those bright tanks. And then the brewing team can't actually brew into those fermentation vessels. So now you get into this waterfall effect where if somebody down the road isn't doing their work, then somebody upstream is actually going to have a lot of issues. And this really becomes the biggest cause of failure for any brewery management system that you implement. Whether that's Beer 30, Ecos, Obeer, Ollie, any of these, you need to make sure that everybody has proper team buy-in and that everybody is in the same direction of needing to implement a brewery software system. Now, with that, step number 6 becomes a go live date, timeline for training and implementation. So what this looks like is set a go live date that works for all relevant team members and build out a timeline for those milestones. Along with that, build a go live checklist. So examples of this could really look like predefining recipes, updating your inventory counts and doing a stock take. So for the ingredient side, grains, hops, adjuncts, yeast, packaging supplies, finished goods, and then really understanding what's the work in process for your tank. So recipe, volume, brew dates, dollar values, chart of accounts for balance sheet and accounting, vendor and customer list, and distribution price list. So these effectively become some of those aspects you just want to make sure that you have access to, because the last thing you want is to go through the implementation process, go through training, and then spend a couple days gathering what's the stock on hand, given how that's constantly changing at a brewery, right? So we tell customers, hey, if you're going live on Friday morning, you do a hard stock count. What do you have on hand? And that's where you enter into Beer 30 and get completely ready to go live with a proper, this point in time, this is the dollar value that's there. And finally, step number 7, make SOP changes, celebrate project wins, and ingrain usage into the culture. So what this looks like is set standard operating procedures and SOPs for software usage. Commit to using the system real time. And I think this is one of the biggest differentiating factors with Beer 30 than other softwares in the market, where everything we do is mobile, tablet, laptop friendly. And we actually have a number of customers that just use it on a tablet, for example, or use it on their cell phone rather than having to have big clunky computers or desktops all around. What that leads to is real-time access by all the employees, so that way you're actually able to understand what's happening rather than having it be homework on a Friday afternoon. With that, have internal KPIs to see how the software is helping. Align the workflows between real world brewing and the software that you're using. So, for example, that idea that I gave of fermentation vessels and bright tanks all ties in with real world brewing and the actual workflow that's present. Ask your employees for feedback on what they like or dislike about the system. Celebrate the wins and milestones. And if there's something that's not working, reach out to your service provider and give them feedback and ask for more training and support. So effectively, those would be the 7 key areas that I would really emphasize for the importance of brewery software as a whole. So before I start talking more about Beer 30, you'll notice that all 7 of those are completely software agnostic, applies for any situation, really dives in more with just project management as a whole, because that's really what you're doing when you think that, hey, we're going to implement a brewery software. It's pretty much another project that you're taking on. So any questions, comments, thoughts before I dive in more into Beer 30 in particular?
PK, I got a question for you. And I appreciate what you were teeing up there was kind of the industry and talking about bringing on these platforms, agnostic. But can you touch on as you go what might be that the way that the fifth ingredient does for some of those implementation? Especially, I saw some things in steps 6 and 7, where you're saying this is, the success criteria. The reason I'm asking is one of the things I hear from some breweries that have stood up platforms in the past, other platforms, is that they felt like they had to do it all themselves. And a lot of times I hear the feedback that they didn't do it right, or they were told they didn't do it right, and now they're frustrated and it's not working as advertised. So I saw some critical steps there, especially in 6 and 7, that seem to be, part of, who can you touch on some of that a little bit on
Yeah,
what you
sure.
guys do for as you go, maybe about the implementation stage to set some people up for
Yeah,
success?
for sure. That's actually tying in really nicely with the slide, actually. So, with that, on our end, we do a 90-minute onboarding session. So that way you have everything that's focused in on the brewing production side and making sure your team is very comfortable with that. We have unlimited live trainings. So that becomes a huge point there, Dan, where we offer that so that way people can have multiple follow-ups as needed and see what it is if they're stuck with anything. We offer a WhatsApp group chat support. So every single one of our breweries has a WhatsApp group. And this is really critical because so many times you would end up having to call a random phone number or, have some offshore company that's actually helping out with support late at night. But in our case, we actually have it set up where it's a WhatsApp group where your sales rep and your entire support team. So that way it's very much on that basis, Dan, of helping people succeed. Because if you don't have access to like just shoot over a quick text, like, hey, how do I do XYZ? It becomes very frustrating, right? And that's really where that aspect of having that group chat becomes really important of getting everybody on the same page and what differentiates us immediately. 77% of our tickets are responded to within 30 minutes, which is also a really good response rate as a whole. We're a completely web app, so mobile, tablet, computer friendly. Again, I think, Dan, that this is one of the areas where there may be failures with other systems where because it's very clunky on a mobile device, or for some of them, they don't even have mobile devices, mobile friendly devices, it just becomes a very involved process to go live, right? You're not going to expect a brewer who is running around, adding in hops, things like that, to have a computer station there where they're going to be entering in the data on a keyboard. That's just not realistic, right? And so with a lot of these, and I'll show this when we show some slides with the Beer 30 side, people just have mobile tablet computer, mobile or tablets, and have that on the actual brew day itself. About 40% of our customers have switched from Ecos, Orchestrated Beer, Ollie, Brew Ninja, Deer, Unleash, Beer Run, and more. The other cool thing about this is that pricing for Beer 30 production starts as low as 129 US dollars a month if you're between 0 to 1,000 barrels brewed annually. So I'll quickly show you how the different modules are set up. But again, the production side is low as 129 if you're between 0 and 1,000 barrels. And we'll actually be able to dive in on some of these key areas right now as well. And with that, Dan, does that answer your question before I start showcasing some of the Beer 30 stuff?
It does, and you're answering some of the questions that I'd had, or some of the, quite frankly, some of the complaints I'd heard from some of our members here. A couple of things jump out on this here, PK. I want to just make sure I'm understanding here. Is it 40% of customers coming from other platforms is a very high number in a good way. It seems like you're solving for some problems, but that's a lot of unhappy customers other places. That number from a software standpoint is a lot of people saying, I'm not pleased over here, I'm going to switch. For example, one of the things that I had heard from some breweries that they had set it up in a way where another platform where they couldn't use it, or they weren't using it in real time. So they were transcribing things and then having to enter it in later in the day. And what they were seeing was two problems. Was people were like, is that a 7 or a 2? So errors were being made when it wasn't being entered in real time because they couldn't do it on a phone. And two, Steve on Thursday did it different than Tim on Friday. And, I don't think that they had ever asked the community, or had a community to ask of saying, how do you set up some basic SOP? A lot of times the expression I hear from people is, we didn't know what we didn't know. Like, I didn't know to ask. I just knew that we weren't doing it right. And it was frustrating, and so all the efficiency that they were promised was going out the window with feeling like they were writing it down 3 times. Or I was told multiple brewers that said, we spent a lot of times having to go back and figure out, is that a 2 or a 7?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you're handwriting it, right? So that's actually really cool overall. If you take a look at our website here, if we go ahead into the actual Beer 30 in action side, one of the cool things here is notice how, like, Rocky Ridge just has a little tablet. Bailey has a computer station set up. White Lakes has an iPad mini. Pelican has Brew Deck as well. You get into, for example, stomping around with an iPad with a LifeProof case. They have a computer station set up. This is also on the screen so that way they can see exactly what's happening on a tank by tank basis. And this is one of my favorite photos, is actually removing the big whiteboard in the office and replacing it with a TV screen. And so this becomes a really good way to actively get into things here and make sure that you're able to properly see how Beer 30 is being used in action.
That's great. That's great, PK. Thanks for answering my question here.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other big thing that I'll just show here as well is this diagram, which is one of my favorites. This is pretty much showing the entire supply chain loop and kind of how Beer 30 dives in on all areas of the system. So if you take a look here, what you're seeing is that there's the scheduling side with recipe created tasks and real-time alerts, production-driven scheduling that leads to material resource planning and understanding if you have raw materials, packaging supplied, recommended orders, which leads to the production side for everything from brew to package, quality and sensory, batch history, leads to the sales sides of order management, delivery, and traceability, the financial aspect, reporting and analysis, such as your brewer's report of operations, TTB information, accounting integration with QuickBooks Online or Xero, and then cost of goods sold. And then using that information for future demand planning, where now you're looking at sales forecasts, demand reports, and production forecasts. So you have this loop that's constantly there with Beer 30, and really what our focus constantly is when it comes to this actual production side. And so with that, if we actually look into the system here, this aspect of the modules, can you all see the PDF that's there?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So the way this is broken up is that you have the core production suite, which has everything for dashboard and tank management, raw materials, yeast genealogy, brew to package, TTB reports, and again, you have unlimited users and platform as well. But then you can add and choose all of those aspects that you really care about. So for example, here you have the inventory and cost of goods sold bundle or module, demand planning, material resource planning, accounting, and sales. So you can pick and choose which one you want. If you want all 5 of them, that's just part of our Brew More bundle. And then similarly for the quality side, you have the quality package logs, CIP, carbonation data, sensory side of things, ferment VDK testing. And again, you can get them all as part of our Brew Better bundle. And then you also have specialized modules such as sales traceability, barrel aging, and also third-party integration. So the beauty behind this is that you're only paying for the modules that you need. And with that, again, the pricing is tiered where if you're between 0 and 1,000 barrels, your production suite is starting off at $129 a month. And if you get like the Brew More bundle, it's just north of $400 a month. So again, you can pick and choose and pick what works best for your production facility to actually move forwards with the right tools for your team and the right tools for success. I know you've had a couple people go in and out today. So Brett, any questions on your end?
Yeah, I've got a question for it as far as the reason we've stuck around with orchestrated beer as long as we have is a while back they included orchestrated spirits. We have not really made use of it at all, but we're about ready to do more distilling. As far as we know, we're sharing tanks for a lot of this. I'm just wondering how we can go about if we were to use Beer 30, how we can implement that and use that for our mead making as well as our distilling that we're doing.
Great question. Yeah, we have a number of breweries that actually do in Beer 30 that do combinations of spirits, ciders, mead, seltzers, NA beers, and ready to drink cocktails. And so effectively it just comes down to the fact that here on the production side, you have your different tanks that you would then properly do. And at the end of the day, this is Brett, right? Based on your name in the on screen.
My name is Eric. My brother, you can't see him. He's sitting right here.
Oh,
Brett.
cool.
And this is
Eric.
Dan.
Awesome, cool. So Eric, to respond to your question, you would in the same way, just like any other beer, you'd create a recipe for it. And that recipe could be a spirits recipe. We only have a couple required fields for each of those items. So you could create spirits, you could create cider, you could create mead. And the key that ends up happening is that you still go through the brew step. And again, you can customize, for example, the brew log that's there associated with it, go through the brew step. But then when you actually finish the beer, you could actually go straight from brewing directly into the bright tank side to package it off. So a lot of our customers that do seltzers or ready to drink cocktails, they'll go straight from brew directly into bright tank and then packaging. Or you can then take those and throw them into barrels, for example, barrel aging, or maybe you go through the full process of brew, ferment, filter, or transfer, bright tank, or package. So we have these different setups that are there for you to just pick and choose based on that particular item that you're making to understand how that would go through the same workflow. Now, the cool thing with that as well is that on a recipe level, we actually allow you to create these branded groups as well. And so this allows you to add in different group names, such as, let's say spirits, let's say cider, let's say mead, let's say RTD. And then what happens is that when you actually run your reports, such as your brewer's report of operations, you can actually then filter by the brand groups as well. And that'll actually result in the data being fluctuating and the data changing based off of what's there. So this will show you across all the items that you've done. And then maybe you're like, oh, I actually want to see it just for the lager. And so that's going to change the values that are there. And so you can do the same exact logic to do the spirits, do the same thing with mead, and have them all based on the recipe groupings in order to actually have that properly update for your reporting. For everybody's awareness, we never fill out the official legal forms for anybody, just from a liability standpoint, but we give you all the data for your TTB information, such as starting FGs, the cellar, fermentation, whip, destroyed. Actually do some validations as well for you to look at data that should be accurate. And then you can always dive in on the data as well underneath. So we give all the information right here at two clicks. Eric, does that help answer your question?
Yes. What else? Didn't we have another question? What do we ask the other guys when we're asked about? Yeah, it does right now. Yep. Thank you.
Cool. And again, the whole point of this is to kind of get you aware of Beer 30, get some more interest in it. And then if you're interested and want to pursue further, at the end here, you'll see that You'll have my email as well. Dan can connect us, but shoot me a note, PK at the Fifth Ingredient, visit the website, and we can have a proper demo as well that's there. So that way you go into the full details, very tailored to your brewery and your needs as well. Because again, this is a live webinar with multiple people on, and then it's going to be recorded and shared to other people. So yeah, I understand that sometimes it can be very specific use cases that we have to work through. But as a whole, what this ends up showing you then is at the dashboard level, being able to understand what's happening when it comes to process volumes, fermentation profiles, and being able to see what's happening on a tank by tank basis. Everything can really be customized here based off of tank statuses and understanding just how those particular tanks are going to be set up. On the actual brew day itself, what's really cool is being able to actually understand what's going on when it comes to different variations for recipes. So imagine you have your green targets, you can then set up tolerances. And if you're not at the brewery and something goes wrong, you can get a real-time text or email saying that, hey, this pH is off or the temperature is in yellow or red. So that way, you know, there's a particular action that you need to take.
Excellent. How about my brother Brett? He just mentioned we have 2 locations. How does that get differentiated? I see there's locations.
Yeah. So
Now we
can you
have-
tell me more about how the locations operate?
Yeah, we've got one to be that hasn't been in operation yet, that has the still on it, the 40,000 square foot facility.
Cool.
Are
they would they be sharing? Sorry, repeat that bit. You cut
And then
out.
the other place is a 10 hectoliter brew pub.
Sure. Question: are they sharing the same QuickBooks Online instance or Zero instance, or are they on separate
We've
bookkeeping?
been using orchestrated beer in its entirety, so we've been using that as our accounting software. So we'd be looking to get away from orchestrated, so we'd be needing to take and extrapolate the SAP data and bring it over into QuickBooks for the most part. That's the only thing I think we can do. So
Yeah, it would be either QuickBooks Online or the other software that we also integrate with is a company called Zero for finances, XCRO. Side note, personally on my end, I love Zero. That's actually what we use for our company's finances. Once I learned about the intricacies of Zero, I just thought it was so much more user friendly than QuickBooks Online. Personal side preference, but something that if you are looking at switching, I'd say just do some diligence between both of them and see which one helps out. They assuming they both have files to import into. So if you're using,
I'll ask my CPA if he's ever worked with Zero. So I
yeah,
have a lot of confidence level in a CPA, and I don't want him to. I think he's willing to look at any of the software we'll be willing to look at. But
yeah, for sure. And we have a number of brewery CPAs as well that end up using the data out of Beer 30. So the way that this would work is that this particular location setup is really designed to act as third-party warehousing. So you'll notice that you have a raw material storage facility, packaging supplies storage facility, and the purpose of that is pretty much that you have that third-party warehouse that you're constantly moving stock in for the actual brew day itself or packaging day. And so that all ties in with this location side of things. Otherwise, if you have just different tanks in different locations, what most of our customers will do is that they'll stick with just the one instance of Beer 30, and they'll go ahead and adjust the tanks so that way the tanks are set up in different location orders. So location 1, location 2, location 3, 4, 5, whatever, and it'll just then group the tanks together accordingly. And then on brew day, you can still go in and pick the ingredients and be able to then have it associated based off of the tanks that are there. And so it becomes a really easy way to have multi locations if you're looking at the same instance of QuickBooks Online or Zero. We do have some facilities that end up wanting different bookkeeping instances. So if you're like, hey, I want, one for my spirit side and one for my brewery side, at that point, if you have 2 different QuickBooks or 2 different Zero instances, you will need to have 2 separate full instances of Beer 30. So we don't allow for cross-pollination. So at that point, you would have Brewery ID 100 and Brewery ID 101, and 100 would talk to your spirits accounting system, and 101 would talk to your beer accounting system. So they're kind of set up in a way where QuickBooks doesn't allow for multi-toggles like that. And so that ends up being an element where if they're all together in the same accounting, you just have one instance of beer 30, and you can then adjust reports accordingly. Yeah. That would be the route that I push most people towards, even some of our bigger production facilities that, like, for example, Black Hops Brewery in Australia, they're doing close to, in that 20,000 plus barrel mark. And they have 3 different locations now that they're brewing production in 2 to 3 locations, but they just have the one instance of 0. So it's all just living in one instance of beer 30 as well. Yeah. The other cool things I want to just highlight in the last few minutes here. So from an inventory side, one of the biggest things is that for grains, hops, and adjuncts, you'll notice this red exclamation mark. And the key thing with that is that in beer 30, we never lock a brewer out of brewing if the inventory doesn't exist. This is one of the biggest differentiating factors. And so, Eric, in your case, do you often get locked out of beer if the inventory isn't there for ingredients? You're muted right now. Hey, Eric, you're muted.
I'm sorry. We were just talking about
Oh.
our right now.
Yeah, so what I was saying was, do you often get locked out of orchestra if the inventory doesn't exist?
Yeah. You can't. It's impossible. You have to. You got to have. You can't have 0 balances. So
Yeah. So in our case, we actually created this not tracked bucket, which is very unique in the industry, because what this allows you to do is that a brewer can still brew, and he or she can mark that ingredient, in this case, let's say 2-row, as untracked, and they can then go ahead and actually keep brewing, keep tracking the quality process data. We'll just flag it as untracked. And then afterwards, when the accounting team comes in or the purchase order is actually implemented, it can then retroactively update all those untracked buckets. So this becomes a really good way where the brewer is never locked out of brewing, and at the same time, accounting and production always has accurate data available based on what the actual numbers are. And so this becomes a best of both worlds scenario, so that way nobody's ever locked out and nobody's ever frustrated. You can also do a lot of substitutions on the fly. So one of the key areas that I've heard a lot of people complain about with other softwares is, let's say you have beer that's gone out the door, and as it's out the door, you realize like, oh, hey, a brewer forgot to enter in the actual like, let's say hops, right? Somebody forgot to dry hop the beer. Well, in other systems, if you already put beer onto a truck, you pretty much have to roll it back step by step. So roll back the orders that went out on the truck, roll back packaging, roll back filtering and green beer, put it back into ferment mode, add in those hops, and then go through the entire process again, going from ferment to green beer to packaging to making those sales orders again. Is that something you've experienced or are familiar with?
of course, it's called orchestrated beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
sanity. Yeah.
yep. And so with that in beer 30, with something like that, I can go ahead and pick my brand and batch, like my brown sugar ale batch 11. And what's really cool about this is that right underneath for the ingredients section, we have a batch history substitution. You forgot to do something, just literally add it in here. You can pick what step it was a part of. Hey, it was a fermentation piece. Oh, hey, it was a hop. Hey, I forgot to add an Amarillo, whatever the quantity was and the dollar values. And it will then retroactively update all of your reports with those new cost of goods sold. And then if you are tied in with something like general ledger syncing for accounting alerts, you can actually get an email that says, hey, somebody ended up retroactively updating this brown sugar ale batch 11, added in an ingredient. So that way, you know, if there's any financial implications, that you can go ahead and change it. And so this becomes another beautiful way of streamlining hours and hours of redundancy into one particular location. Now, the other cool thing with batch history is being able to really pull up a brand and batch out of a push of a button, understanding what's going on from raw material costs, packaging supply costs, the overall cost per barrel as well. And then what this breaks down into is a 24 pack of bottles is $15.27. 24 pack of cans is $10.93. Half barrel kegs are $92.84. And being able to really understand what the ingredients breakdowns are for grains, hops, adjuncts, packaging supplies, and then even things like final beer specs, brew sheets, and brew data, understanding what's going on with fermentation curves and gravities, and being able to add in more process data as well. So again, being able to understand what's happening at a step-by-step of the process. And if I go into something like charts, what's really cool is I can pick a beer like my Cambodian snake venom, and I can then graph out any of the process data. So I could do something like fermentation, put day numbers on the x-axis, gravities on the y-axis. Sorry, is there a question?
All through the whole process.
Excuse me, he's asking about transactions and reversing a transaction. Say it again, Brett.
Yeah, like in orchestrated, if you made one mistake and you didn't realize it all the way until at the end, then I have to go back and reverse every step that I did to get to the final product. How is it? Can I go back easy to correct the error? So that's one digit on a cost of something, and then I just realized, well, my malt was, wasn't 36 cents a pound. It turned out to be $1.50 or something, and then
yeah, literally all you'd have to do is you can just click on this little pencil here, and where it says 40 cents, I can go ahead and literally just change that to be $1.24. Excuse me. One sec.
that affects the
$1.24.
right. So, and then will that change the batch that I had already done? I guess
Yep.
that's what I'm saying is, how do you go back and fix like the cost of your product that was wrongly entered before?
Yeah, so everything is tying in with the appropriate lot numbers that are here. So in that case, all you'd have to do is edit the actual addition of it, and it's going to retroactively update all the costs that are associated with it. So we have it set up in that way, Brett, where you can actually go in step by step, and you don't have to like roll anything back. You could just say, hey, that grain was the wrong cost. Well, then just fix that one grain. Why do you have to go in and like fix all the other things that like orders that were correct or clean beer that was correct? That doesn't make any sense. And so just hit the pencil, simple as that, to be able to make that adjustment.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies as well, real quick. The same thing applies where you notice how this is untracked. So this allows you to actually go in and hit the little pencil, and now you can actually tie it in with a tracked lot number after the fact. Right? So this is that example of the brewer coming in at 5 a.m. He or she is starting to brew. If the inventory doesn't exist, they're not going to stop brewing to track that, purchase order down. So they can still go in and still then just pick the lot number, and then it'll actually tie in with the exact cost of goods sold as well. So again, constantly getting those updates and being able to understand how things from an inventory perspective are done. So that way, Brett, you don't have to roll back every single step.
Such a nightmare doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Just as we wrap up here, the other really cool thing I want to show stuff with charting is being able to pick a number of batches and being able to really understand what that looks like from a perspective of gravities, really being able to add in multiple axes as well. So it could be gravities or pH, and being able to really understand what that looks like. So understanding from a purely, graph quality standpoint, these aspects as well. And then when you get into something like brand history, you're able to actually go ahead and pick a particular brand, like my brown sugar ale, and I can now start seeing all the data across multiple batches, tying in together to understand how data is trending batch over batch as well. And so these are all reports that in other softwares could take a number of spreadsheets or number of custom reports, but these are all pre-built into Beer 30 because this is what our customers always want. And so with that, just as we wrap up here, as I said, if you're interested in any of this questions, let me know. We also have a bunch of case studies and more things on our website. And then, PK at thefifthingredient.com. You all should have gotten a calendar invite link as well, but also just throw my email into the chat as well. So that way you can have that and be able to go from there.
All right. But do you guys have a sales module as well?
Yeah, fully. So that all ties in on the distribution side. So you can actually see here the exact inventory levels that exist from a distro perspective across all the different inventory items. You can have multiple cold boxes, warehouse locations. You can then actually go into this and actually make an order. So I can create an order, pick the company, price sheets, what I'm selling, keg deposits, keg credits, all of that, and then actually being able to pull up an order and actually go into it and print out the order, packing slip, bill of lading, assign them to trucks if needed, and being able to really have these printed out and then have this sync over with QuickBooks Online or Zero as well. So that all ties in directly with our whole sales module here with finished goods, sales, and delivery.
Do you do any integration with POS, or is that kept separate?
We do not integrate with a POS at this point. That's kept separate. The idea behind that on our end is that realistically, Beer 30 is tracking what's happening with the actual items. So what most people will do is that they'll create a tap room, for example, in the system, and they'll sell or move into that tap room 6 kegs of beer. At the end of the day, you just have the 6 kegs of beer. We don't need to have every single ounce or flight or things that are being sold from that 1 keg of beer, right? All we care about on the Beer 30 side is, hey, you had 1 keg sold at $100 to your tap room, and then really in your POS, because these POS systems integrate with QuickBooks Online, your POS is the one that's actually tracking flights, samples, ounces, etc. And that information would really just muddle up the Beer 30 side, where on our end, all we know is that, hey, 1 keg went to your tap room, and that's all that really matters.
Gotcha.
Right. So that's the logic, and our customers absolutely love that because it's worked out nicely for them where it separates between the production side with the actual front of house side as well.
Gotcha. And so the pricing structure, you said it was $129 a month, and then what was $400 a month?
So pricing is based off of the actual modules that you're picking. And so you can go very much a la carte into things. So that way you're not actually spending money for things that you're not going to utilize. So as an example, let me just pull up a price sheet here. And again, this pricing is confidential, but I can show you an example here real quick. So if you one sec. So if you take a look at the screen here, you'll notice that based on this particular tier 1 pricing, it's $129 for production suite. But if you want to add in, let's say, cost of goods, sales, and accounting, that ends up being $378 a month. If you're like, oh, I also want to add in material resource planning or demand planning, well, that one could become $428 a month. And so it's that element where you can pick and choose out of all the modules what you need. So that way you're not paying for something like sales traceability or quality. And you're really just tying in with the production and inventory, sales, and accounting, and you're good to go. So pricing varies based on the modules that you pick, really giving people that a la carte mentality rather than pay a lot of money for all the stuff and then never end up using half the functionality.
What's the
And the
next
cool
tier
thing
price?
is, what was that?
What's the next tier price? If we're at over
Yeah, I can
1,000.
actually, because this is a normal webinar, I can actually, when I stop recording, I can then actually show you the tier 2 pricing as well, just so you have that awareness. But yeah, we can stay online for a few minutes right after and look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
But at least that gives you an understanding for at least tier 1 that it can start off at $129, work up to $378, $400, depending on which modules you're picking.
But it maxed out at 400. Is that what you said, or is it? Or does it?
No, I mean, it depends on which modules. I mean, you could go in and get like
everything
quality
you do.
stuff, barrel aging. You could add in integrations as well. So we have integrations with things like different sensors. So Plato, precision fermentation, fintech, eye control. So all of these are just separate pick and choose. So it would actually have to be a custom quote that we would build for you based on which aspects you need.
is the integration considered, is that considered an integration to QuickBooks or to Zero as well, or?
The QuickBooks side is
Yeah.
tied in already with the accounting sync piece here, so that would be at that $83 for tier 1.
Gotcha.
Cool. So I know we're coming up on time here. So we can stay online and have a specific chat for tier 2 pricing. But as a whole, yeah, thanks for coming associated with this. And Dan, any final thoughts on your end as we wrap this up?
No, PK, I want to thank you for the time and presentation and going through it and just making it very both showing a little bit under the hood, but also keep answering questions, keep it relevant to what everyone's kind of facing on a day-to-day. So appreciate it.
For sure. Thanks for having me. I'm going to stop the recording.